As we begin, this is Sharon, and Sharon is the younger sister of one of my best friends, Naomi. And the reason we know our families know each other is because your family moved into my house in Tanzania when we left.
That's right.
And then you ended up being in Tanzania for how long?
So let's see. My family was in Tanzania. My parents were in Tanzania for close to 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there for about 13. So I was thinking about it and I realized, Siri, that our families have known each other for 35 years at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. And I like to say that Naomi's the oldest friend I have. And then I have to remember I've known her the longest
Yes.
of any
Yes,
person that I
exactly.
still know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
So thank you for being here. And the reason why you're here is because you are an immigration lawyer.
Yes, I am an immigration lawyer. So I have been licensed for, I'm coming up on 7 years. I'm actually licensed out of Minnesota, which is where I went to law school. I went to Hamlin over in St. Paul, which is I think now called Hamlin Mitchell. And spent a lot of time in Minnesota. It's where I got my first job at Lutheran Social Service in the refugee department.
Mm-hmm.
It's where the missionary apartments are located over on Como Avenue in Eustis in St. Paul. And so I spent a lot of time there close to the seminary, to Luther Seminary.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously this is an issue that has come to the forefront in conversation a lot in the last 4 and even 8 years with border things and stuff like that. And I just, what I'm understanding is that most of us just really don't know what we don't know about
Mm-hmm.
immigration. A lot of
Yeah.
statements, I know enough to realize a lot of the statements that we've said are just kind of come from a lot of ignorance. And so I was hoping you could give us a little bit of enlightenment, but
Yeah.
first, why don't you share how it is you got into this line of work?
Yeah. So I think it really does stem back to having grown up in Tanzania. Um, because I find that where I feel most myself and most comfortable is when I'm surrounded by people from different countries.
Mm,
And so and Lutheranism runs deep in my blood. I went to Luther College. I did the Lutheran Volunteer Corps. I went to Lutheran Immigration Refugee Service, and I landed at Lutheran Social Service. And um, but it never occurred to me to seek out immigration as a career. But it was going through all of these different steps in my life where I realized after I joined the Lutheran Volunteer Corps and was placed with LIRS out in Baltimore, that it seemed like such a natural fit for me to find a way to step into a world where where I can see myself and other people in a way that I'm very comfortable. And that is to be working with people from other countries who speak different languages.
mm,
And so it was never really a moment of me saying, oh, I'm going to help these strangers. It was much more of an experience of I see myself in these people and I want to assist them and navigate an incredibly complicated federal system that they find themselves in here in the States.
yeah, that's that's great. Um, I really appreciate that perspective because one of the things we're doing a lot of work now at Atonement, we're reading through a racial conversations Bible study. And one of the things we're talking about is how most of us have been isolated in mostly white communities.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very comfortable being around white people. And we can choose to be around almost exclusively white people if we want to without even thinking about it. And that there's not always comfort and therefore
Mm-hmm.
not knowledge or
Mm-hmm.
understanding of the experiences of people who are not white.
Yeah. Yeah, and I see that in a lot of, I've done a lot of speaking to different groups, and primarily I would say I've spoken to a lot of churches about immigration in the last few years, and I think, immigration is such a hot topic right now. And it is often misrepresented. And sometimes it is misrepresented intentionally to create an image of who the other is. But to your point, Siri, there is such a lack of understanding and of understanding of how immigration works and what it actually means to go through the process. That some of the information that is out there that is wrong is just simply because it is so complicated. The immigration law is so deep, it is so broad. And I think that without knowing that it is this deep and broad and complicated, there are this many laws, it's very easy to boil it down to the other, and to just sort of leave it at that, and to put blame on immigrants for doing it wrong, when if the deeper you get into it, you realize it is so hard to even find a way to do it right, because our laws have built up so long that they have created barriers for people that you just can't get over.
One of the things that I recently learned was our history of immigration is basically built a little bit more on how do we keep the right people out rather than how do we let people in. Is that about right?
That is exactly right. And we have really not seen that more so than we have in the last 4 years, to be honest. But yes, I mean, you go back to the Chinese Exclusion Act. I mean, it's in the name, it was very much about who do we keep out, who do we let in, and that changes based on who our country finds desirable in the day.
Yeah. So here's a fun situation. I have Norwegian immigrants in my ancestry. All of my great-great-grandparents were Norwegian immigrants. What would they have had to go through to become an American citizen back in the late 1800s?
Well, putting my knowledge of immigration history to the test here, but to my understanding, in the 1800s, honestly, and now you can definitely fact check on me, but I do think at that time, what you needed to do, I mean, if you came through Ellis Island, then you were registered, and then you were you came on a boat, you were registered, they checked you for diseases, and then you were here. That was it. There was no visas. There were no quotas for, how many visas Congress will issue per year. And in fact, if you wanted to become a citizen, you would just hike down the road to find a judge and say, today I'd like to become a citizen. And he'd write you a little certificate, and that was that. Yeah. Whereas today, I spoke to an American citizen whose sister lives abroad and is, from a different country. And I said, well, you can file for her so she can come in with a green card. That process for her to access a visa will take 14 years. 14 years. We're not talking about a work permit. We're not talking about citizenship. We're talking about getting a green card to come with a family. So when we talk about doing it the right way, and our ancestors did it the right way, the hurdles that are presented to immigrants today were just simply not existent at that time.
Yeah, and I've just heard little stories here and there from congregations and pastors, because there's this movement of the sanctuary movement that's been around for a few years. That's Christians have always had sanctuary, which is if people were feeling oppressed or harassed or in danger, they could historically go to a church and claim sanctuary, and there have been periods of time where the Lutheran Church and other churches have stepped up with that. And it's happened again because there are members of their congregation who are, for example, of Hispanic background, that are trying to go through everything. And it's like everything just it's hard. Like you said, it's a really hard process. And they've been terrified that they're going to be yanked out of their homes. And so churches will keep them within their walls, waiting for the date when they can go before a judge. It's just, the stories just kind of make you wonder what the heck is going on here.
Yeah. So, yeah, so the sanctuary movement it was really big in the 1980s, and there was an entire movement that started in Arizona. It definitely sort of petered out for a while, but certainly in the last 4 years, when we have been seeing our immigration system has just become a system of deportation at every level. I mean, in the last 4 years, immigration has been systemically dismantled very meticulously from the inside out to create just a deportation machine. And so where you may have had space before to approach an immigration judge and say, my client has an avenue of relief. They have a way to finally fix the circumstances that they're in, but they need time. That time is no longer being afforded to them. And so what we were seeing is at every level, even in the immigration courts, is tools that immigration judges would have used to ease their dockets to sort of try to get work completed were being taken away from them. And so then what you have is people who are left with no options, where ICE is literally waiting outside a door to take them and deport them. And I think a storyline that not even a storyline, but just a reality that gets missed time and time again is that immigrants, I mean, whether they are documented or undocumented, I mean, unless you've got citizenship, you are deportable, meaning at any point, if you mess up, even if you have a green card, you can still be deported and put through that system. So whether we're talking about documented immigrants or undocumented immigrants, they don't live in a vacuum, you know. And I think there's this idea of like there's this sort of this underground life that people live where they're all undocumented and committing crimes. And the reality is most of them are, you know, they're paying taxes, they have a job, they have children who are citizens, they have spouses who are citizens. You know, I have spoken to people in my office whose parents are citizens, their siblings are citizens, their children are citizens, their spouse is a citizen, their entire family are US citizens, and this person literally cannot find a way out. And I think that has been missed, is just the impact and the instability of what it means to have one person in your family who just can't get through the hurdles of immigration, not for a lack of trying or a lack of desire. And that's what I hear frequently is, if, you know, if they loved this country so much, why wouldn't they become a citizen? Mm-hmm. And it, you know, the common sense answer is, well, they can't. I mean, if they could, they would. And so I think for churches to get involved and to say, all of us are sinners. None of us can point a finger at someone else and say, you have done, you know, you are worse than I am in the eyes of God. And to be tearing families apart like this, and for churches to step up and say, if we can offer protection and allow this person to get through a legal system that does exist as much as it's being taken apart, then we need to step up and protect this family, because it is not, like I said, when people don't live in a vacuum, you can't just lift one person out of the fabric of their family and not have that reach to the very far edges of that person's life.
Oh, absolutely. And I've heard stories of people who they've only known America. And so all of a sudden they're being deported to a country they've never been to in their entire lives, and their whole family, including little children. So it's crazy when you actually start to unearth some of the stories. And most of my field of reference comes from other pastors, Lutheran pastors, and the work that they've done, and how they've gotten involved. And it just seems like there's so much of a lack of compassion in the system that's in place. A year ago, this was just sort of one of those crazy things, and you can say more. I'd love to hear your thoughts about ICE, because I didn't realize that that's only like 18 years old, or something. Like ICE has only been around since 2002. It's not some long established American institution. But a year ago, when we were at the ELCA National Convention, we decided to do a march to the local ICE headquarters. It was a peaceful march. There was about 700 of us, pastors and other people. and we were chanting and singing Amazing Grace and everything. And we were feeling pretty good, just that we made a stand. And then we heard that that very day, somewhere in another state, the exact same number, 700 people had been seized by ICE and were to be deported. And we're like that was sobering.
Yeah. It is sobering because it puts a face to that 700. You know, when you can say, now I know what 700 people looks like. I also know that each one of us who marched, the circles that reach out from every one of us are significant. They're significant to the people whose lives we have touched and whose lives, you know, vice versa. And to understand that, you know, I think that's what hits us in our office, in my office, over and over again, is how incredibly harsh and unforgiving the immigration system is. I mean, there is one misstep and the entire future of your life is impacted permanently. It's not even like there's a statute of limitations or that, okay, so there you made a misrepresentation to a federal agent. I am not saying that it is okay to lie to a federal agent, but in the sense, I'll give you an example just to put this in context. I had a client who she lived in her home country, was gonna come visit someone here in the States, and had heard the easiest way to get a visitor visa is to tell the officer that, you know, is granting your visa that you are married, and she wasn't. I am not saying that this was okay, but this was the magnitude of the lie she told. She said she was married when she wasn't. Came here, realized just how much help this man that she was visiting needed in his own family. He was a single father too. They'd known each other and dated years ago. They decided to get married. They were having a child together. This one tiny statement that she made that was a falsehood permanently barred her from ever getting her green card. And you think about when you make decisions like that in your life, all of us make bad decisions at one time or another, but to permanently bar someone from being able to remain with their family is so unbelievably harsh. It time and again, it catches me off guard. Now, in this situation, there was one way forward where they could do a waiver, but they had to show extreme and unusual hardship to the American citizen.
Okay.
And it's not enough. Hardship is not enough to say, if my wife isn't granted this waiver, she will be deported and never allowed back into the United States. And so we are facing the reality of either my family and I now permanently separated, or we have to leave the United States, my job, everything I know, the rest of my family. That is how harsh American immigration law is. And so when you are talking about that number, that 700, and to hear that, you know, the mirror image of people being removed from their communities and what that human impact is, it is staggering.
Yeah, and just stories about kids who'd go to school and they'd come home and they didn't know where their parents were because their parents had been grabbed. What
You know,
the
in
heck,
any
you know?
other world, that would be criminal negligence, you know, and child abandonment. I mean, the fact that the government can do that, the government can leave children alone and have no repercussions, no accountability.
Yeah.
Again, it floors me to think how much we devalue another human and their children simply because they're from a different country.
Yeah. Right. It's yeah. So here's kind of an interesting question. I'm sure you've thought about this a lot. If you were in charge and you had the power to make immigration a thoughtful, helpful, compassionate, logical system, what are some things that you would love to see?
So I was asked this question a few years ago at a different church, actually in Missouri. My husband and I went to talk at the church for a weekend. And I feel like now my answer is even different from then, because in under 3 years, we have had about 200 policy changes in immigration law alone. So if you think about that, I thought about that today. That is a policy change every week.
Right.
Every week for almost 4 years. So in order for us as immigration practitioners to keep up with how fast immigration is falling apart, it's a bit of an overwhelming answer to give. What I would say is, so there are sort of like 3 primary buckets that you can divide immigration into. You have the immigration court, which is completely separate from every other court system in the United States. They're not connected to criminal court. They're not state courts. They're federal courts. You have immigration court. You have family-based immigration. You have employment-based immigration. Those are sort of the 3 main buckets. Then you have asylum, for example, which is, you have humanitarian, I guess, which could be that's a 4th bucket. If we start with the courts, I would say 1, make the court independent. Right now it's under the guise of the Department of Justice, so the Department of Justice controls both the judges and the prosecutors. When you talk about a conflict of interest, they have the same boss. So the immigration judges right now are not actually neutral, and they are often just under the thumb of the Attorney General and are told this is how you have to rule, and they cannot make independent decisions. So 1, it would be make the immigration court its own independent court and give authority back to the judges, because it has the authority of judges has just been constantly stripped away in the last 4 years. So that'd be the first thing. The second thing is to give more discretion to judges in court to say, this is a situation where this person entered once without papers. Now they're in deportation. They're married to a U.S. citizen. They have U.S. citizen children. They have a separate way forward to legalize their situation under the existing law. Right now, immigration judges have just been stripped of exercising discretion over their own docket to say, these are the cases where, like, this is actually a dangerous person who has committed a felony. That's the person I'm going to focus on and say they shouldn't be allowed to remain in the United States. This person here who has a family and children and a job, I'm going to exercise my discretion, give them the time that they need to fix their situation, and we'll be done with it. That has really been stripped away from the judges.
Wow.
If we're talking about immigration court, that's where I would start. For family-based, that's the primary area that I work in. And I would say there are so many changes that have happened under the idea of chain migration, right? This idea of, like, once you become a U.S. citizen, you just, like, we're just scattering citizenship all over the country to everyone else they're related to. For that, I would say recognize that the family unit is sacred, and that, you know, we already have a system in place for, you know, you hear about sham marriages and green card marriages. We have a very solid system in place for immigration officers who are trained to look for that, to keep their radars up. But to give some compassion and some love and understanding to families who really are trying to do the best that they can in a system that is incredibly unforgiving. The biggest thing I would do away with right away is this new rule that rolled out in February that has just been ping-ponged in the courts ever since then, sending everybody's heads spinning. But essentially it says, if you are too poor, you don't get to keep your spouse here and give them the benefit of a green card that they are entitled to because you don't have enough money. That's what it really boils down to. And so that rolled out February 24th, and it has been back and forth. But it has a chilling effect. It means that you are so afraid of bringing yourself forward for a very discretionary rule that it's a policy really that has been rolled out, where an immigration officer has complete discretion to look at an applicant and say, I just don't really think that you are the right kind of person for a green card, even though you're married to a US citizen, I'm just gonna deny it. And this is another policy that was put in place in 2018. USCIS is the agency, it's United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. They are supposed to be the customer service branch of the immigration machine, right? So you want a green card, that's where you bring your application to. You have an officer, not a judge, who looks at it and determines it. They have been transformed into an extension of ICE. So now, one of the new policies is if you send in an application and you're missing a birth certificate, instead of sending what's called a request for evidence, the government has the authority to take your money. And let me tell you, to get a green card, it's $1,760 to apply. Okay. They take your money, they deny the application, and now they have the authority to issue a charging document to put you into deportation proceedings. It's like a 1-2 punch. It would be like filing your taxes and the government saying, you made a mistake here. Instead of us coming to you and saying, can you fix it? We're going to say that you never filed your taxes and then put you into court to put you in jail for having made a mistake. That is the level of harshness that this new policy has. So things like that have created a chilling effect where people are eligible.
Yeah.
There is a law in place that they can legally access and bring themselves out of the shadows. The policies that have come down in the last 4 years are such that people are so afraid they won't try. And so I would bring USCIS back into the spotlight of saying, your job is to be the customer service. Let ICE do ICE's job. You know, of course we need enforcement in some level. I would definitely restructure ICE. I don't really want to get into that conversation right now, but it is something that I would do. And then for employment, I mean, there's a lot that we could talk about for employment-based immigration. There's a lot we could talk about asylum. I mean, asylum has been the main area of immigration law that our current administration has done its best to dismantle and to mislabel. And it is really the most heartbreaking part of this, I think, is for people who are genuinely afraid for their lives. Yeah. We have made the system practically impossible for them to gain asylum and protection from the United States. Yeah. And that would probably even be the first place that I would try to restore some sense of compassion and understanding.
Yeah, you know, I think about how rooted my life is here with my family and my friends and my job and resources. And I think, what would have to fall apart? How bad would it have to be that I would flee and try to go to another country, even one where I didn't speak the language? Yeah. I mean, we think, oh, well, there's Canada. Imagine if it wasn't Canada. Imagine if it was Russia or Japan up there, you know, like completely different life and language, and things would have to be horrible. I would have to be desperately afraid for my life, for Theodore's life, for Lucy's life, to feel like that was my only option.
To take that risk. Exactly. You know, and I think that I wondered how COVID would change our perceptions of what desperation means, what it means to face losing your job when it has nothing to do with your capacity to do your work, you know, your how eligible you are for the job, what it means to face eviction for the first time, what it means to lose your health insurance. I mean, all of those kinds of things that it is such a thin curtain, right, in terms of our sense of security and what could really just suddenly put you out on the streets. Yeah. And that we're not even talking about persecution. In that sense, we're talking about an economy that has crashed so hard that we are now truly desperate. And to get to that place of reckoning and then add on the layer of abject fear. Someone is trying to hurt me. Yeah. Someone is trying to take my children from me. You have to layer that on top of it and say, that is what we're talking about. When we have people at our border saying, I am afraid to go home. Mm-hmm. And that has very intentionally been twisted in terms of what we hear about asylum seekers to try to shut down that program.
And it feels like so much of the laws you've talked about that have shifted, almost the amount of laws that have shifted have almost made it intentionally hard for you, hard for the person seeking, and almost to the point, like you said, where people are afraid to go through the process. So it's almost, let's see if we can, this is my thought, let's see if we can make this as hard as possible to discourage people from, and then double, triple ICE and grab the people who haven't gone through the process and kind of rid our country of whatever, which is a deeply, I mean, racist seems like too simple of a word for.
Yeah. It has been if you follow immigration closely, it is very clear that this is an anti-immigrant, very racist system that has been set up to make it so hard. The toll on our clients is incredible, and honestly, the mental the mental toll and emotional toll on immigration lawyers also, I think, is profound, because we are working with our clients as closely as we can to protect them, and in many cases are up against a system where there's just nothing that we can do to prevent their deportation or losing their family members, or I mean, all of the different things that could happen, and it's devastating. It is really devastating.
Yeah. I remember several years ago, you showed the profile. I don't know if that's the right word. You showed how thick the paperwork was that you turned in for one client. And you said, I filed this today. This is what people have to go through to try to get, I'm not even sure if it was green card or what it was, but
that was a green card.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because that was a couple of years ago. That thickness has doubled. It's about this. I mean, it's almost a full ream of paper. I send about 400 sheets of paper now to try to get someone a green card. And that is specifically because of these new policies that have gone in place to just make it harder. They just make that mountain higher and higher and higher. Wow. And I think that's something that a lot of Americans don't understand is there are no absolute benefits that are given to someone who's not an American citizen through marriage. You know, I've had a lot of people come to me and say, oh, I just married, my spouse. Can we just do this? Can we just do we have to file for the green card right away? And I've said, I mean, there's no law that says you have to file for them right away, but they are not protected from deportation by virtue of being married to a U.S. citizen. They are no more protected today than they were yesterday when you were not married. Yeah. So wow. I think that piece is also lost, that there is no automatic acquisition of citizenship unless you're born on U.S. soil, and that stems back to the foundations of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. So I do think that there's a lot of basic information that is missing when we're talking about immigration. And like I hear the anchor baby argument about women come here just to have a baby so that the woman can be a citizen, a U.S. citizen. And I've broken it down and done the math. It would genuinely, and I'm not joking about this when I say this, from the day the baby is born until the baby turns 30, it would be a 30-year plan that this woman had in her back pocket when she had her child. And even then, that is not a given.
Wow. Yeah. I think that's the thing is there's so much bad information out there, some of it intentional to make us afraid of the other. And some of it's just plain ignorance of people who don't know. And there's statements like, well, they should get in line. And I know you published a great thread a couple of years ago too, an article where someone said, there is no line. That does not exist.
There is no line.
You don't walk into an office, get an application, pay a fee, wait, that's not how it works. Yeah.
No, and it's interesting because the same woman I mentioned who I talked to this morning, where I said it would take 14 years for her sister to access the visa that she would apply for. She said, well, but in the meantime, can she come to the United States? Can she live with me? Can she work? I said, no, you can't apply for a work permit at a U.S. embassy. Literally, you cannot apply. You can't just go to a U.S. embassy and say, I want to come into the United States and work and then get the right papers. So when people talk about doing it the right way, I think there's just a lot of assumptions being made about how the U.S. immigration system works. So either you have to have an employer who jumps through all of the hoops to bring a non-U.S. American worker in. Most of those hoops, for most of the types of visas, it requires that the American employer proves to the Department of Labor that there are no Americans available or willing, capable to do the job. So you have to actually, American employers have to recruit. They actually have to recruit for the position. They are obligated to interview any American who applies and be able to articulate to the federal government why this person doesn't qualify. So that's the first, I mean, you can't just apply to come to the States to get a work permit. So that already eliminates the, coming in the right way, because it doesn't exist. You can't do that. Same thing with family members. I mean, I have an American client here in the States whose son lives in Europe, is a European citizen, and the American wants to bring his son here. First, I think it's important to note the father is American and was American when his son was born. That doesn't mean his son is American, right? Then that's like the most straightforward application. You have a biological relationship. I mean, actually, for a father to transfer U.S. citizenship to a son, the standards are more stringent than for a mother to transmit citizenship to her child. But for this very, very straightforward, clear-cut relationship, it will still take probably about 1.5 to 2 years before that son can come here with a green card. That is assuming that the embassies are open due to COVID, that people are allowed to travel into the United States, and that's like assuming that none of COVID is even coming into it. So I don't think that people really understand. There are very strict laws for immigration, and two, they're so limiting that there are a lot of people who they will never have the opportunity to access the right way to come in.
Yeah. It's interesting because one of the shows I like to watch, kind of winding down for the night, is House Hunters International, where you get some couple from the United States who, because of a job or retirement, they're looking for houses in some other country. It could be the Virgin Islands, it could be Nicaragua. A lot of times it's Europe. And they're looking for houses, and it's really fun. And there's often at the end, they show them having a dinner party with an expat group of people. And it's so assumed that as maybe particularly white Americans, but as Americans, that we could just go up and leave, go to another country, and there'd be a community there for us. And we call them expats. I remember reading this recently. Someone said, we're an expat when we're in another country, but when someone moves here, what are they?
Right.
And I just thought that was so fascinating. Like that's a massive disconnect of people who are trying to come to America versus if we just want to leave and go to another country.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of assumptions we make too about our own privilege, about how safe we are, and therefore we can't really understand why someone would make the decisions they do to flee their country. Mm-hmm. But also how easy it is truly for Americans with an American passport to travel, or because there's a sense of Americans are desirable for work, so it's easier for us to get work, but we apply those assumptions to other people, and then get frustrated when they don't make the decisions that we think they should have made, or that they don't access a system we think exists, which honestly just doesn't exist.
Yeah. Wow. I know this is a huge, huge topic, and we could talk probably about all the intricacies of it all. There's the whole refugee thing too, that has shifted in the last 4 years. But I guess I want to close by saying I was telling a woman from the church this morning that I was going to interview you about this. And she said, oh my gosh, she goes, I just want to know, what can little me in Minnesota do? And so that I guess I'll leave that question as our final question is, for those of us who don't know much, we're so far from borders, even though, yes, we do have immigrant populations here in Bloomington. What should we know, and what could we do to advocate for a better system?
So there's a lot of things. So Minnesota is actually unique for its refugee resettlement program. It is one of the only states that is a family reunification state for refugees. So yes, and Minnesota, the Twin Cities, has 5 well, when I was working there, they had 5 resettlement agencies.
Mm-hmm.
So getting involved with a refugee resettlement agency or supporting them. Now, so one thing that I think is really important is that refugees are like asylum seekers in that they have fled persecution. The same legal standard applies to asylum seekers as it does for refugees. It's just, it really comes down to geography. Are you seeking this status outside the borders of your own country? But the UNHCR, United Nations, is going to apply refugee status to you. Or are you coming to the borders of the United States and seeking asylum within American territory? All that, what I'm trying to say is when refugees enter the United States, there is not a single refugee that enters illegally. All refugees enter with refugee status that is permanent. They're allowed to work, apply for a green card. What our administration has done is limit the number of refugees that we allow. So typically, in most years, we've allowed up to 100,000, 110,000 refugees every single year to the United States. And yesterday, President Trump, I think, said they were proposing 15,000. So they're dropping it by almost 90%. And these are people who have been screened by the United Nations. They have a credible fear of persecution. They have gone through incredible hardship to finally be resettled. I think it's like between 1% and 3% of refugees worldwide are actually resettled in a third country. Mm-hmm. So for the people who are arriving to the United States, support your refugee resettlement. It's Lutheran Social Service, there's Minnesota Council of Churches, there's International Institute. You'll know all of them. So that'd be one. Another is to patron an immigrant-owned business and not just don't just go and buy food there, but get to know them. Get to know who they are. Make friends with people in your community. And then the other thing that I think is so important, if you have school-aged children, help them learn how to reach out to children who are not native English speakers, who are clearly not from the United States, because those kids are already in a system that's stacked against them. If they don't speak English well, it is hard to get through school. Now, I realize with COVID that puts extra limitations on, but this is just moving forward. Mm-hmm. And it shouldn't be on these young children who don't know English to also have the burden of trying to make friends.
Yeah.
And it's so isolating. And so encourage your friends. Right now during COVID, have your children read books about what it means to leave your home country. There are some great books out there for children about refugees, asylums, or just moving to a new country. Yeah. Read books about people of different races and encourage them and give them real tools to extend that hand across the lunch table and say, I'm so-and-so, what's your name? And become their friend in school. Because I really think the more that we see each other as children of God, we can see our humanity in each other, it just promotes learning and we understand systems better. It just breaks down those walls of this sense of the other. And so that's the big thing that I would say.
Yeah. Oh, that's great advice. So much of it is about human connection. We may not be able to be the ones who go to court and argue for this or that, but yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. So, wow, it's a lot, and I'm so glad that you're doing this work, and I wish you lots of mental health.
Thank you.
Because I know it's incredibly taxing, and but so grateful there are people like you who are doing this. So
thanks. Well, and thank you for taking the time and for asking the questions and starting to learn a little more. Just as a great resource, I would encourage people, if they want to learn about immigration, go to immigrationimpact.com.
Okay.
They have fantastic articles. They are a branch of the American Immigration Council that does a lot of litigation and a lot of research. They are nonpartisan, and they have some really fantastic information. So immigrationimpact.com. That's a great place to get information.
Okay. I'll see if I can't link that in our comments below. Okay. For people who aren't readers, but they might watch a movie, do you have any movie recommendations or TV show recommendations that give people a glimpse into some of this?
I think I'm remembering the title of this movie right. I think it's called The Visitor. It's from 2007. And it is a beautiful story of human connection. And I mean, it doesn't get deep into immigration, but it definitely shows the impact of immigration on a life.
Okay.
So I think that was a really beautifully done movie.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Hope you have a great weekend, restful weekend.
Thank you. It's so fun to talk with you, Siri.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. All right. Well,
Okay.
talk to you later
Have a
then.
good day.
Bye.
Bye.